Aloha and welcome to the DKI APCSS podcast for our Transnational Organized Crime Community of Interest. Today, our first podcast will be with special guest Rear Admiral Robert Hayes, who is the commander of Joint Interagency Task Force West, also known as JIATF-West, here in Honolulu, Hawaii, up at Camp Smith. JIATF-West is an interagency organization responsible for disrupting counter-drug activities here in the Indo-Pacific region. What's unique is that it works in coordination with partner nations to develop capacity to disrupt transnational criminal organizations, and making him the perfect guest for this podcast. Thank you so much, Admiral, and welcome. Your background is largely focused on intelligence, which my colleague Inez Miyamoto, who is my partner in crime in this transnational crime working group, has a background in as well. And you've led operational units conducting homeland security, counter-narcotics, search and rescue, disaster response, icebreaking, which is a new up-and-coming major issue for a lot of folks, and aids to navigation missions. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we have a series of questions we'd like to ask you so that our community can get smart on your work and some of the things that they need to know about the region and counter-drug mission. All right, sir. So the first question that we wanted to ask you are, what are some of the recent shifts in crime JIATF-West has observed in the Indo-Pacific region in light of, there's been a lot of things that have been changing in the world with COVID, et cetera. So since you took command in 2019, what are you observing?
The production of methamphetamines has really increased drastically in Myanmar or Burma in the last several years, to the point where it's probably the largest global producer of methamphetamines. And that's a huge regional issue. At the same time, Mexico has become an increasing center of gravity for the production of drugs. So you're kind of bookending on both sides of the Indo-Pacific here. Myanmar used to be the major producer of heroin, is not as large a producer of heroin but more into the synthetic drugs. And that's been a phenomenon in the last few years, the increasing production of drugs just made from chemicals. So not using plants like when you make cocaine or heroin, but just purely using chemicals. So that's harder to target when you're on our side of the spectrum, because you can set up a lab to produce chemicals in a small space. I'm not advocating that. That's not advice for you or the audience, to start producing chemicals, but you can use a warehouse, you can use a small room inside a building and make chemicals, bring chemicals in and make drugs. Whereas if you're going to make heroin or cocaine, you need lots of plants and other things and lots of space, and usually outdoors to do that. So Myanmar becoming a much bigger producer of meth, a huge producer of meth. Mexico also increasingly producing fentanyl, heroin, and methamphetamines in the last few years, and also exporting a lot of their meth back into this region, particularly to places like Australia and New Zealand. Secondly, fentanyl has been a big change. That was really not a drug that was on anybody's radar probably 5 to 8 years ago. And it's been more of a phenomenon in the United States and in other more wealthy nations, but increasingly we're seeing that dynamic changing. Most of that used to be produced in China and then shipped directly to the United States. Just speaking for the United States, China has outlawed fentanyl analogs, and so now the production is shifting. A lot of it's in Mexico, and we're increasingly concerned about regionally where that might shift into other countries in Southeast Asia. Then I would say the convergence of smuggling organizations. Mexican cartels tend to dominate the Western Hemisphere. Asian gangs tend to dominate Asia. But increasingly in the last few years, we've seen a convergence and cooperation between those two in a way that we didn't see before. So large conglomerates like Sinaloa or CJNG in Mexico with many of the Asian gangs and triads, more cooperation, more partnering, if you will. And that's a concern because they're both very capable in their own right, and then when they work together, they're harder to address.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, that was the evolution of that the globalization and the linkages between Sinaloa and the triads. It is a very scary partnership or relationship. In terms of your mission is counter-drug, and these convergence of groups, it's not just the groups that converge, they're also diversified in their portfolio, and some of the relationships and the things that happen are not just transnational organized crime, but there's also linkages to some other international security challenges that cross borders. So some of it related to terrorism, some of it related to just some national strategies that people are using kind of below the radar. So could you talk to us a little bit about that, how this counter drug mission intersects with some of the other security priorities for folks in the region?
So fundamentally, smuggling drugs is a crime, and when you smuggle drugs, you usually do it to make money. It's not like organizations like Sinaloa or Asian gangs or whatever get in this because of ideology. They're in this to make money. So there's always a money laundering aspect to that, which is a huge challenge. And a lot of time you see that flowing through casinos. You know, we see casinos in this region that there's almost no patronage in it, and yet somehow they are flowing millions and millions of dollars, through their accounts. And you know there's a connection to organized crime and most likely to drug sales and drug smuggling. And so I would start with money laundering right off the bat. That's always going to be there. And it sounds easy, but it's actually hard to launder money because a lot of the banking restrictions that are in place. And then when you're trying to launder cash, bulk cash, that gets pretty hard because it's hard. It takes up a lot of space. I've never tried to do it myself, but when you get lots of dollar bills or $20 bills or whatever, it's huge, it's heavy. And, we've actually, not we at JIATF-West, but previously in my career, I've seen, interdictions and seizures of bulk cash, and it's a lot. It's hard to do. So money laundering for sure. A lot of these organizations will also get involved in smuggling various other contraband. And so at times that could be smuggling people. It could be smuggling weapons, counterfeit things like counterfeit tobacco and cigarettes, the whole range of counterfeit activities. So there's a lot that goes into that. A lot of these organizations are, they have a lot of product lines, if you will. They're businesses in a sense, and that it's not just smuggling drugs. They're into lots of counterfeit and lots of smuggling activities as different lines of effort, if you will. I'd say take it to a higher level. Crime and drug trafficking organizations, transnational criminal organizations, they have a corrosive effect on governance as well. And so while that's not another line that they're smuggling, the impact of crime is very corrosive. There's a lot of corruption that goes with it because you're trying to get things through border security and you're bribing government officials, or sometimes they're complicit. There's violence that goes with it. And so there's just a whole impact to society that goes along with the crime and the criminal activities that have an impact as well outside of the commodity that they might be smuggling.
Thank you, sir. And that's it, this spectrum of just activities and players, and this being an interagency task force. How many agencies do you have working together in joint JIATF-West?
So quite a few. We have all service except for the Space Force. That's the U.S. military force, but we have the other 5 services. We have members from the intelligence community. We have law enforcement partners, so also from our Drug Enforcement Administration and Homeland Security Investigations. They have liaisons and an analyst on the task force. And so probably about 10 different organizations when you get down to the different military services, law enforcement, intelligence community, and then our partnership is much. Even though we have people sitting on the task force on a daily basis, we are coordinating with command centers and intelligence organizations from multiple countries across the Indo-Pacific, as well as many agencies and organizations within the United States on intelligence and law enforcement sharing.
This isn't on the question. How much interface do you guys have with JIATF South? With this merging of Sinaloa and some of the triads, I imagine that the communication since this has been born in 2004 has grown.
It has. The JIATF South is dealing mostly with cocaine that's flowing out of South America and heading northwards towards Central America, Mexico, and the United States and the Caribbean. However, remember shipments that also go west into our theater, and so we coordinate on a regular basis. So where we develop leads that are going into their area, we'll pass them to JIATF South, and conversely, they pass them to us. So cocaine is smuggled out of South America across the Pacific, using sailboats, sometimes boats to places like Papua New Guinea and Australia and New Zealand. At one time, the price for cocaine in Australia was about 10 times what you would pay in the United States, about $250,000 for a kilogram, a little over 2 pounds, at 25 to 30,000 in the United States. Since then, the drug traffickers have found that market and they've been shipping more cocaine to Australia, and so the price has come down, but it's still probably about 4 to 5 times as much as in the United States. And so there's an incentive for them to ship cocaine there. It's not just one example. Also in the precursor realm, one of our main areas that we focus on is the precursor chemicals that come from mainly China to Mexico, Colombia, Peru to make the drugs that are produced in those countries. Lots of precursor chemicals that have legal uses are coming in ships towards those countries. And we work with partners in Mexico, in South America, with JIATF South on tracking those shipments as well.
Thank you, sir. In your time here, what are 3 challenges or opportunities that you see as an effort, as an area to focus to make progress? Whether it's the greatest challenge that is, that you need to immediately make progress on, or there's opportunities now in this weird COVID space where things are changing so much to take advantage of that and make progress?
There's probably more challenge. No, there's a lot of challenges. There's also a lot of opportunities. Just like I said, the organizations that we're countering are very adaptable, and so they present a myriad of challenges as far as the routes that they're using, the methods that they're using, a whole host of things. COVID has impacted our ability just because, frankly, people aren't working at work as much, and so it's harder to share information. It's harder to collaborate with them when they're not, accessing their normal information, their normal systems. In most countries, there's less law enforcement focus on counter drugs because law enforcement's being diverted to dealing with COVID and other things. I would just say, again, stepping back, to really counter drugs, you need a 3-pronged approach. We're focused mainly on the supply reduction, if you will, or interdiction and taking out the networks. But there's also a piece of how do you educate people about what's bad about using drugs and prevent them from using them? And then the treatment piece as well that deals with people who have overused or abused drugs. And so really you need to be focusing on all 3 of those. And while my organization tends to focus on the interdiction supply, really when you think about it from a whole of government approach or a whole region approach, you need to be looking at all those. And so when we're working with other countries, kind of shifting to the opportunities, what we try to do is help them across that spectrum. And the good news about the counter drug world is that's an area that most people recognize it's bad, right? There's not many people saying I'm in favor of drug use or drug abuse or crime or drug smuggling. And so we find willing partners, and that's a good thing because that draws us closer across the Indo-Pacific. It brings together countries that might otherwise not have incentive to work. As an example, the United States and China actually work together in the counter drug fight pretty regularly and with some effect. I mean, their outlawing of fentanyl analogs in early 2019 was a result of direct conversations between senior members of the United States. In fact, the President of the United States visited and was talking to President Xi, and they agreed to that. And so that's just one example where we can collaborate with people that we're not, collaborating with in other areas. And so, what we try to do is work with different countries on everything from, do you have the strategy and policy framework, the judicial framework underneath that, the interagency cooperation, the international cooperation? Do you have the skills to recognize drugs when you see them, to test for them and validate what drugs they are and to handle them, to do maritime domain awareness, so identify vessels of interest around your country, to target and track them, to do boardings when you go out and interdict. And so for us, it's an opportunity to work with other countries to strengthen the bonds, to strengthen the ties with them. And what we've also found is when you're dealing with other countries and you're helping them with information sharing, with vessel targeting, with maritime domain awareness, with counter network analysis to fight drugs, it typically has a corollary effect in other missions, such as countering illegal fishing, countering weapons smuggling, human smuggling, the other associated crime that we talked about before. And these are problems for almost every country. And so by helping them get better at fighting drugs and fighting organized crime, we also help them get better at fighting other elements of that. Again, illegal fishing, which happens to be a huge issue in this region as well.
Thank you. That was a great response and comprehensive. In terms of the spectrum of agencies, when you're talking about prevention and intervention, that really does broaden out. And it is, you're right, that there's nobody saying that fentanyl or methamphetamine is a good thing for the community. So this is your mission is a unifying mission that everybody can get behind, and it brings in the spectrum of actors, civilian and security actors, and from the international multilateral organizations on UNODC and Interpol and so on and so forth. So it is, you guys have a tremendous opportunity in a time of competition and sort of tension to keep bringing people together around a common security interest, and that's just spectacular. Moving on with what you're looking at and some of the things that we've talked about, if somebody's working in this field, where would you point security practitioners to look for more information and to really kind of get the bottom line up front? Because we're all overwhelmed with information, particularly in this COVID environment. There's so many webinars, there's so many publications happening, but all of us are working that do anything operational. We need bottom line up front. We need quick resources. We need to know where to go to get the best stuff to make decisions. So where would you push people to go to look for information against your mission?
And actually, you referred to one just in your last comments there. So UNODC, which is the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime, great resources. They have a regional office in Bangkok. That was my one of my recent travels. I was there in February and met with the head there, Jeremy Douglas, and they have some great products that they put out that I believe are on their website. And I would say that's one I would start with, because they are very good, very thorough, and particularly for this region, they've done some great products on the challenges that we face and the threats that are in this region. I would say similarly, the International Narcotics Control Board, the INCB, it's an organization that's affiliated with the UN, and it helps to assess the compliance with UN conventions on illicit drugs and drug trafficking globally. They've got some good reference materials as well. And then from the US perspective, the Drug Enforcement Administration and the Department of State's INL, or International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Bureau, also has good products on their websites. And I think they're geographically focused. And so if people are interested in seeing, for this theater as opposed to what's going on in Europe, Africa, or South America. But certainly UNODC and the INCB, as far as international global organizations, have some really good products. Like I said, I've read several of them recently, and I have had some great engagements in person and virtual in the last few months with their regional office in Thailand that has some great perspectives on the region.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So we've gotten through the bulk of the real content questions for this short podcast. But in terms of, in your perspective, what's one issue that keeps you up at night that you think that we need to really be focused on now, that is maybe not necessarily on the radar, but will be something that we need to focus on, that if we don't look at it, it'll be problems?
Sleep pretty well, I guess. If I worry more about my kids or my family or whatever than this, because we have a good team and we have great partners. I think just some of the challenges that I talked about before, they're just ongoing, and it's at times it can feel like you're at the beach and you're shoveling against the ocean, given the vastness of this, because the traffickers are constantly adapting. And so I guess it's trying to anticipate what the next change is. Fentanyl, I would say in some ways caught us by surprise about 5-6 years ago. And so anticipating where the traffickers are going, where the organizations are going, is something that, kind of is always in the back of my mind. What's the strategic intent? I always ask the team, they don't just tell me the what, tell me the so what. Why does this matter? We saw this event happen. Is this indicative of a new trend? Is this indicative of, new strategic development? So I guess trying to stay ahead of the problem, try to anticipate, where traffickers are going. And I would say, increasingly just chemical-based drugs, that I think we're going more and more that direction. Not that heroin and cocaine are going to stop being abused, but it's easier, cheaper, and more mobile to produce just purely synthetic drugs, and we're just seeing increasing variants of that, and so we figure out which fentanyl or which precursors go into that, the traffickers adapt and they go to another one. And so how do we address that? How do we get ahead of that? How do we come up with a policy and judicial framework for that? So some of these are questions, well above just trying to interdict drugs, actually. So.
That's one thing about criminal industries is it's a marathon for certain, and it's always evolving and adapting, and you cut off one head and about 5 more grow back, and it is a challenge. So it's all of you that are in the fight, you get guys and gals are heroes, because honestly it's not something that goes away. It's something that you have to stay and you have to keep your brain sharp, right? So very good points. Probably the most important question of this entire podcast, really, we're going to go to right now. And this is going to be the toughest one. But if you could be any character from any movie, TV show, or cartoon, what would it be?
That is a tough one. That's outside my area of expertise, actually. So, probably when I was younger, I would have thought something like, like Harrison Ford, in Indiana Jones movie or something, like swashbuckling action figure or something. But maybe as I get older, I'm not sure if he was in a movie, but probably was. So King Solomon, from the Old Testament, just the wisdom. I think as I get older, wanting to have wisdom, and really understand things and make best choices is something I'd rather have. So maybe my swashbuckling days are behind me, and now I'm looking forward to the future, whatever. So that's my best answer for you. Yeah, that's a tougher question. So.
That's a great, noble answer, sir. Thank you. So thank you so much for your time. We're trying to keep these short. We will, if you have any recommendations of things that come up that are challenges for you folks, or you read something that you'd like us to touch base with an expert and do a quick podcast, please have you and your staff reach out to us. We're going to try to build this community of interest. And, we could not have started with a better person for the first of these podcasts, to have the chief of our counter drug efforts here in Indo-PACOM. So thank you, sir. And you have been very good and very patient, and thank you for entertaining the last question. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Thank you.